On this episode of Take Back the Advantage, Machiavelli, Security Maxims, and Star Wars Deception, we also interview CyberTrap CEO Franz Weber and get the corner office executive perspective on deception. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to get all the deception content you can handle. Coming up right now. So deception has been around for a long time. In his book, The Prince, Niccolo Machiavelli stated, "Never attempt to win by force what can be won by deception." Well, as we talk about deception, a couple other times during this channel, I've talked about the maxims of security that the CIA put together back in the 80s. And maxim number 10 is kind of interesting. They refer to it as care and design of planned placement of deceptive material. And basically what it says is great care must be executed in the design of schemes to leak notional plans. Apparent windfalls are subject to close scrutiny and often disbelieved. Genuine leaks are often occur under circumstances thought very improbable. So what we're saying there is, if you're trying to feed a lie to your adversary, if you're trying to feed deception to your adversary and you make it too easy, they are likely to be suspicious. Wait a minute, that shouldn't have been that easy. Maybe it's a trap. So sometimes it is better to make your adversary work for their goals because they are more likely to believe them. Now, I was kind of looking for a great historical reference for this, and there are tons of them, but none as good as my favorite, which is Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope. So in Star Wars, right, you had everybody ending up on the Death Star, right? Luke Skywalker and Han Solo, Princess Leia, Obi-Wan Kenobi, R2-D2, C-3PO, they're all on the Death Star. And the goal was that they needed to release the tractor beam so the Millennium Falcon could leave the Death Star. Well, all kinds of craziness ensued. You know, they get caught. They're in all these gunfights with stormtroopers. Obi-Wan Kenobi is killed in the process. And then they finally get off the Death Star. They take off. They have some TIE fighters chasing after them. They blow those things up. And then they leave. And Princess Leia then basically says, they're tracking us. They have to be tracking us. That's the only reason we got away so easily. Now, Han Solo's like, what are you talking about easy? That wasn't easy. That was difficult. They were shooting at us the whole time, blah, 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 blah. I mean, let's face it. That whole scene gave stormtroopers the perhaps warranted, perhaps not, notoriety of not being able to hit anything. But the fact of the matter is that they were let go so that they could get tracked back to the rebel base, because interrogations against Princess Leia were not working. So if they would have just let him go, then that would have been highly suspicious. Now, when we talk in the world of cyber, what that ultimately means is when we start putting out deception in the world of cyber, everything needs to appear as normal as possible. And in fact, some of the deception that we put out there, we should make people work at it. So in other words, rather than passing clear text protocols over a network with passwords in it, maybe we want to do authentic algorithms that involve a hashed password. So we send a hashed password across and make the password something that's relatively easy to crack, but not too easy, and that'll more likely be believed. So a little bit of a background, kind of historical context, that kind of stuff. So at this point in time, I'd like to introduce our guest. We have Franz Weber from CyberTrap. Welcome to Take Back the Advantage. Franz, why don't you tell everybody a little bit about yourself?
Yes, hello. Thank you for having me on your YouTube channel.
Absolutely.
What can I tell you about myself? I'm since October last year the CEO of CyberTrap. We are a deception technology software vendor based in Europe, in Vienna, Austria. I have spent my whole life in IT. I started right after my studies working for IBM long years. Then I worked for multimedia division of Philips in Vienna. And after some time, I went on my own. I founded my own business, and through some projects, I somehow diverted my focus into the IT security field. And yeah, I have a sort of history with CyberTrap. The company CyberTrap is 5 years old now.
Mhm.
It was a spin out of an Austrian security consulting company called SecConsult. And actually, the owners of SecConsult, they hired me 7 years ago to write the first business plan for this piece of software they have created within their consulting practice. At that time, nobody knew that this would be named deception technology. It was something new,
Mhm.
and they said, okay, does not work within our consulting business. We want to spread it out. We want to spin it out into a separate company, a software company focusing to bring this product into the market. So since then, I'm attached to the company. Then in the meantime, I was doing some other consulting work, but I came back 2017. And as I said before, end of 2019, I took over the CEO role in the company.
Awesome. Awesome. And it's kind of an interesting perspective because I talk to a lot of people who are involved in deception, and you know, it's like I've been involved in deception for the last 15, 20 years and all that kind of stuff. And I get that. But it is interesting. And I'm going to be very interested in kind of hearing your thoughts on deception as somebody who hasn't lived this for decades. So let me, let's start off with this one. In terms of this concept of deception, what well, I'll say this, at least for me, when I first got involved with it, there was this kind of process that was probably overly long in my case, where I'm trying to kind of figure this out. I'm trying to, it didn't make a lot of sense at first. I was just sort of like, wow, what is going on here? And then one day it sort of clicked. And I was like, oh my gosh, if I was doing a penetration test against this stuff, it would be a nightmare. And then like all the pieces just sort of fell into place, and I was like, oh my gosh, this stuff is amazing. How was that process for you, coming to learn about deception technology as a concept? And was there a moment that you can remember where you were like, oh my gosh, this stuff is just fantastic?
Yeah, it was similar to your experience. When I came first across this, it was like, okay, sounds great. Why is this needed? I was not aware that a lot of companies have breaches, a lot of hackers circumvent the best security measures, and as you said in one of your other in your other YouTube videos, there are statistics how long hackers are inside till they get detected. And I was like, oh, wow, is this really the case? I can't believe. And then I started to study and research a little bit more about breaches, and most of the companies who are stock listed, they had to reveal a lot of data about their breaches. They had to write what happened. They had to disclose this, and I was stunned. I was wow, this is really happening. And these are companies. Some of them I worked with. I know they have all the things in place which you should have in place. It's not that they are amateurs. They have their own SOC teams. They have everything there, and still attackers get in and stay there undetected. So I thought, this makes sense. This makes absolutely sense. And then I heard the story how actually this product CyberTrap was developed. It was at one big client in Germany, a technology company, who was permanently attacked by obviously hackers from Asia, and they were always wondering, what do they want from me? Why are they coming again and again back? Yeah, I cannot keep them out. What can I do? And this was the starting point, and that's where I said, yeah, this makes absolutely sense. And actually, if I'm in charge of this, I would definitely take deception as an additional measure in place, because otherwise I have no idea what's happening.
Yeah, and to me that actually, so I actually really like that, and I like that in the context of, so I've been involved in the information security industry since, well, I guess most officially since early 2001. That was my first job officially as a security consultant. And then before that, I had, gotten involved in it in previous roles in IT. So I've been living information security for a very, very long time. And it's sometimes hard for me to realize that some of the things that are just so apparent and obvious to me aren't apparent and obvious to a lot of other people. And specifically when you start getting outside the space of security and you talk about kind of like, I'll just say, a typical CEO or a typical board of directors, the things that are blatantly obvious when you're in this field aren't as obvious, and in all honesty, rightfully so, aren't as important. And so it's important, I think, that when we're in this industry, it's a good reminder, to, at least to me, that we've got to keep in mind that not everybody comes at this from the same, background or basis. And so I think that's a really important thing. Now, when you started getting involved in deception, I will say this, and I'm kind of asking this just as much out of personal curiosity as anything. Everybody that I've talked to who has been involved in deception, whether it's been on this channel or otherwise, every single person that has kind of become knowledgeable of it has also become incredibly passionate about it as a game-changing or an industry-changing technology. Do you find yourself in that same boat?
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And you know, every day when we work with customers and we see how we get their feedback, we see how satisfied they are and how much they appreciate what we do with them. It's a confirmation. It's a confirmation back that this is the right solution. This is the right thing, and hopefully more and more customers will adapt this, and hopefully, as you said before, it will be more, you know, telling the customer what are the advantages of our solution versus the competition, then telling the customer why they need deception.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So let's say that there's a fairly non-technical CEO that ends up watching this. So you had talked about kind of your journey in terms of understanding the problems, how it takes so long to detect breaches and all those types of things. By the way, I do have to say, thank you for watching. You mentioned that you watched at least one of my videos. So you were the one that watched one of my videos. That was awesome. Thank you. I do appreciate that. But as you talked about that journey, what would you say to another, like a CEO of maybe like a non-technical type of a CEO, to get them started in that journey? What is the message to that person that may not have that understanding? How would you get them from where they are now to where they need to be?
Yeah, I would say there is one message is clear, because we hear all the time the question, okay, why should hackers attack my company? Or why should I be a target? Here, the message is clear. Anyone can be a target. Mm-hmm. So that this should not be an excuse not to do anything. Yeah, and the second thing which we learned is, and that's from my experience, and I was also not so much into security at that time, but I figured out through all the things I was reading and researching that there is a lot of breaches, a lot of hacks going on, a lot of attackers are inside big companies and companies where you would assume they do a good job in security. And that opened my eyes. Yeah? And when I was reading in their annual reports, when they disclosed how much it cost, they had unplanned cost to get them out. Yeah? It went into the millions. We mm-hmm. just had last week a case in Austria where a company disclosed what they did to get the hacker out. It took them 6 months, and the costs were really millions of euros. then it's obvious, it's clear. Yeah, you must not be a big technical expert to understand all the security measures you have. You must just understand that this is a matter of fact.
Yeah. And it is funny because we've been fighting that same battle in information security for 20 years or more, right? I mean, I've been involved in it kind of give or take for about 20 years. And this concept of nobody would hack me, I don't have anything of value that they would want. And the fact of the matter is that everybody has something of value, whether it's a big multinational corporation or somebody's grandmother, right? Because bad guys, not only do they want sensitive data, financial information, whatever, like they want profitable things, but you also have, they want bandwidth, they want processing power, they want memory, they want to be able to use resources because that can expand their botnet or whatever. They want places where they can deposit their contraband, right? Nobody wants to be the person that has the bad guy store illegal adult material, right? That kind of stuff on a computer. And then as we move even further, we start more today to start seeing that threat of ransomware. And the number of organizations that have gotten decimated with this ransomware stuff. It used to be you would get this pop-up box of, hi, I've encrypted some of your stuff, pay 300 of something, right? $300, 300 euros, whatever. Today, the bad guys who are responsible for ransomware are much more methodical about it, as opposed to compromising a computer. They get into a network and they quietly move throughout the entire environment, loading their ransomware on every system. And then before firing it off, they actually go and corrupt or delete the backups. Then they turn it on for the entire network. And instead of saying pay $300 or whatever, it's now pay us $1 million to turn this stuff back on. So everybody is a target. Everybody is everybody is at risk for this type of thing. And I think that that's a super important message to get out there. And I appreciate that you brought that up. Now, how do you believe that deception changes things? I mean, let's face it, you had talked about big companies with lots of security stuff already in place. IDSs and IPSs and firewalls and antivirus and DLP solutions and all this technology. What is it that deception technology brings to the game that's different?
Yeah, I think the first thing is fundamentally taking a different approach, because all what you mentioned before is trying to prevent somebody to come into a computer system, a network. Deception says, per definition, we know that somebody will be inside. Let's find the person as fast as possible, or the hacker or the hackers as fast as possible once they're already inside, to keep the damage to the minimum possible. That's one thing. The other thing is that with deception, we always say to our customers, there are no false positives. If somebody comes into our CyberTrap, yeah, and the alarm goes off, that's a serious alarm which has to be taken serious. So you don't have to deal with hundreds of millions of alarms. You have to deal with a few, and they are serious, and you have to do something. So it gives you a better visibility and more precise results.
Absolutely. And by the way, I like, you said the hacker kind of interacts with your CyberTrap. That'd be a great name for a company, don't you think?
Yes.
So how about this? So I think that there's one of the challenges with deception technology has to do with perception. So on one hand, you have the word itself, deception, right? There are a lot of cultures that view deception as a bad thing. And so there's a bit of a negative connotation there. And then even if that's not the case, I mean, let's face it, everybody that I've talked to about deception is talking about effectively this, and I'm exaggerating a little bit, this magic technology that can do amazing things that we've never been able to do before as easily as we can with this. I think that there's this resistance on the part of people that it sounds too good to be true. So even if they're not pushed off by the word deception, which can be scary and it might create impressions of being bad, hey, wait a minute, what? I've already got all this technology. I don't want to load another piece of technology on there. How would you talk to maybe a decision maker in terms of overcoming some of those obstacles, or what are some of the things, or if those aren't the biggest obstacles that you've run into, what are the obstacles that you see that organizations put in front of them that get in the way of deception?
Yeah, you made a good point. If something is too good to be true, we as human beings tend to be suspicious. We say, okay, well, cannot be. How can this be? So we are not telling the customers that it's magic. It can do everything. Of course, also deception is not 100%. Mm-hmm. There's no guarantee from any of the software vendors, but what we're telling the customers is they have to see this in combination. When they look at their security strategy, they have to see this as an additional piece of the whole network they are putting around, of the whole security network they are spreading out. If there is one thing missing, and maybe there is an example also like a keychain. This is always as strong as the weakest part of the chain. Mm-hmm. So if you're missing out this part in your total picture, then it will break there. Yeah. So that's what we're trying to tell the customers. Plus, where I think what is a good example for people who are not so technical is, think of it like a fire alarm. Yeah, it's there, it's built in. Hopefully there is no fire and it will never go off. Yeah, but if there is smoke and fire starts, it will go off. Alarm goes off, and you can act on it.
I actually really like that analogy because, I mean, let's face it. We've all, or probably most of us, have been in a situation where a fire alarm has gone off and it hasn't been anything. I mean, I'm in hotels, or I used to be in hotels all the time. And there have been a handful of cases where the fire alarm goes off in the hotel and you've got to leave. Now, those situations are very rare. Like, I've been in hotels hundreds, if not thousands of nights, and it's probably happened twice or 3 times, something like that. So, and I like that in terms of it's a high fidelity, very reliable type of an alert. Is it possible to have a false alarm? Sure, but they're fairly rare and fairly easy to figure out. And if you contrast that with a lot of the detection technology we've had in the past, so your IDS is generating 1 million events a day, or your SIM is processing 12 million events a day, there's just a tremendous amount of work you have to do in terms of care and feeding of those technologies. Whereas with deception, you end up with the fire alarm, right? You don't really need to mess with it all that often. It's not going to go off unless somebody does something that is outside of the normal. And even if there is a false positive, it's super, super easy to figure out what's going on, right? It could have been a user that did something that they were not supposed to do or whatever, but it's really, really easy to do that. Now, one of the other points that you made that I thought was really good was that deception isn't a replacement for our existing technologies. It's something that we can add into the mix. And the one of the things that I personally like about it is you can have a very robust kind of all of the bells and whistles security program. You've got every bit of technology that's out there. You can add deception in there and it works great. And you could be a brand spanking new company that has very little security program, and you can add deception in there, and it works great. Now that said, again, to this point of it not being a magic pill or a silver bullet or whatever, what would you say to organizations in terms of, all right, they love this deception stuff, they want to go deploy the deception stuff. Is it something that you can just go and, like, I mean, let's face it, an organization could go buy a firewall at the drop of a hat and drop it in? Are there things that you believe that organizations should be prepared for, or that they should have ready before getting deception in place? And that could be technology, it could be thought process, it could be policies, procedures, anything along those lines.
Not necessarily a lot available. I think where we spend a lot of time thinking about with the customer is about the deception environment. So they should think about first, what are the critical assets, which assets they want to protect, which attack vectors are most likely for these assets. And then we will sit together, because as I told before, we're coming from a consulting background. We are spin out from a consulting company. So the people who came from the consulting company, they still have this DNA. They would sit down, we would sit down, we would define this deception environment based, we would define the deception stories, as we call them, based on the needs. And then it's fairly easy to implement. Of course, the question the companies have to answer themselves is, do I have the people to run and monitor then the deception solution by myself? Do I have my internal people? Do I train them and they can do it? Or, like, let's say, more small, medium-sized companies, they will not do it. That's not their core business. They are not in the business of hiring IT security experts. They will say, can you do this for me? Can you monitor it for me? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So this is something which we also want to offer. We figure out that's important, and this should be offered. In our case, we offer this together with our sales partners, with our resellers.
That's awesome.
Because that's a critical factor in the whole thing. You need to monitor it. And if there is an alarm, you need to be ready to do something with that.
So I cannot possibly, it's funny because as you went through that whole thing, one of the things so yesterday I recorded a video that I'm going to be putting up on this channel, just a little short format. And it hasn't been posted yet as we're talking right now, but I'll have it up, what will be this afternoon, which is in the past of when this is whatever. But anyway, yesterday I filmed the video, and the video was about the cyber deception top 4. And the top 4 that I came up with was, and this was sort of, if you're going to do deception, these are the things you kind of need to have ready, if you will. And the first one I said is know thyself. You need to know what you have. You need to know where your assets are. You need to maybe have a data classification scheme, know what vulnerabilities you have, that kind of stuff. So that was number 1, know thyself. And you brought up all those points. And then know thy enemy, right? So understand what the attackers are after, understand how they are likely to get in, understand something of their behavior so you can make sure that you plant your cyber traps in the right places and all that kind of stuff. And you brought those up as well. And then my number 3 was be aware of your goals, right? And you start talking about creating that deception story. And with deception, you have a lot of potential goals, right? You could be looking to detect attackers, to distract them, to delay them, to deter an attack, to collect threat intelligence, all that kind of fun stuff. So you've got to be aware of your goals, and you actually spoke to that as well. And then the number 4 one was incident response. You have to be able to actually pay attention to this thing and effectively respond. And I thought it was pretty awesome because literally you did that exact same thing, or you went through every single one of those. So I guess that boils down to great minds think alike, or fools rarely differ. I'm not sure which is which, but it really is. It's one of those things that I think, to me, I think that one of the big differences about deception, and maybe one of the scary things about deception, is that the goal is not inherent in the technology. So what I mean by that is, if you deploy a firewall, you deploy the firewall because you want network traffic filtering, right? And I'm oversimplifying things here, of course, but you deploy a firewall because you want the firewall. You deploy antivirus because you want antivirus. You don't deploy deception because you want deception technology, right? Deception technology, what you're trying to do is effectively influence the behavior of the attacker, detect the attackers more quickly, all those types of things. But you can have different goals, and the technology is just part of the messaging channels that we use to convey that message to the attacker. So it's a much more human versus human type of a thing than most of what we do with cybersecurity. Because most of our traditional cybersecurity is technology versus human. We put up the technology and the attackers are the humans. But with deception, we can put a human aspect on defense. And I think that's incredibly powerful, but it can also be a little scary because IT people just want to deal with ones and zeros. They don't want to deal with what the attacker might be thinking. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, this is true. Absolutely, it's difficult to understand if you're not into the deception and into the world like we are in our everyday business. I think it's also part of the sales process to take away from the technical people this fear. Yeah, we experience this typically through proof of concepts where they want to see how it works and things like this.
Mm-hmm.
And where we go with them through the process, and we show them how and what, and this opens a little bit the eyes. But you are absolutely right. This can be something which people are reluctant to accept. Yeah. But
So,
yes, it's the biggest, let's say, advantage of the concept, actually. Yeah.
yeah, I agree. I agree. So in terms of those folks, obviously you work for a company that sells deception technology. And so you've had people who have purchased it, implemented it. What do you think is the biggest surprise or the biggest thing, maybe unexpected thing that organizations, once they deploy deception, that they experience? Like what's the wow factor that you see organizations experiencing?
The wow factor is once they see what information is gathered and what information they can get from an attack, what threat intelligence they really realize, wow, this is really something I don't get anywhere else. This is something specific to my company, to my network, which I can use immediately. What is yeah?
Oh, go ahead.
What we also see, very often when the solution is implemented, the dashboard is up and running. Most of the people, the analysts, are used to have a dashboard which is fancy and shows a lot of red blinking alarms. Yeah, and it goes further, saying, yeah, I need to have something more fancy here because this one is very good for me as a security analyst. But if my manager comes and the manager of my manager, they want to see something fancy. Yeah, can you provide something like this to me? So,
Absolutely.
This is a little bit the expectation because they are used to work with CMs, with IDS systems, whatever, and they work this way. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It's kind of funny because yeah. I'm going to be a little more blunt than you are. And I'm just going to say the big wow factor is it actually works. And it's a weird thing to say that because if you think about it, IDSs and SIMs and all this kind of technology, I mean, yeah, they do provide value. And I don't want to in any way say that they don't. But if you think about it, their approach to providing value tends to be very different. It's about volume. It's basically creating this big data problem because we'd rather have all the events, we'd rather have all the alerts, because if we don't have them, we can't do anything with them. Whereas the first deception technology that I was ever introduced to, I don't even remember which product it was because I've seen a ton of them these days. But the very first one, they got to the point where they showed their interface, right? And their window where the alerts are going to be. And they said, yep, this is where you would see all the alerts. You should never see anything here. And I went, what? Like, wait a minute. That's not what any other detection technology that I've ever seen says. What everybody else says is you're going to get millions of alerts here, and we're going to show you how you can tweak and tune and adjust this thing and all that kind of stuff. Which I think is so fundamentally different. And it also kind of highlights an interesting sort of non-technical advantage of deception. And I'll just throw this out there. How do you see deception playing in terms of organizations that have security operations centers, SOC, and efficiencies and driving down costs? We know that deception can allow us to detect attackers more quickly. Have you seen that deception also helps organizations reduce costs from like a SOC operations perspective?
Yeah, I don't have that much insight into the SOC operations of the customers, but I see that all of them are integrating deception as one piece of the SOC operation. And what I see is that also so-called managed security service providers now integrating deception technology as one part of their offering. And clearly this is the goal. I spoke to one bigger one in Germany, and they said, yeah, the calculation behind, the business case behind that is clearly that we can reduce our cost by having not that many people working on alerts, but you know, having people focusing on the real alerts, and this brings our cost structure down and makes our offering better, and the business case works.
Absolutely.
Yeah?
Absolutely.
So this is clearly how they think about that, and the customers as well, because even if you have big teams, we all know to get good trained people who have security know-how is really, really hard. It's tough. Yeah. The market is dried out, and once people get a better offer, they move on, and you start from the beginning. So even there, they see that they can optimize the operation by doing the same thing with maybe same people or lower amount of people, or can afford that one is leaving and they don't have to replace him immediately.
Awesome. So let's talk a little bit about CyberTrap. In terms of your guys' solution, I mean, obviously I'm not looking for any of your secret sauce or whatever, but how do you guys, what makes you different from some of the other vendors that are out there? How do you position, or how would you position for those that are looking out there and they're like, hey, this CyberTrap stuff, this guy seems like he knows what he's talking about. Talk about what you guys do.
Yeah, what are we doing? As I said before, we are coming out of the security consulting world. So our focus was always on and it was born out of an incident response team which was working with a customer in Germany, and then together with this customer the solution was somehow, the first prototype was created. Mm-hmm. So what we are doing is we believe we are very strong, and we have an advantage on the analytics side, on the back end side. Yeah. So of course detection is important. Yeah, you need to have the right lures in place. You need to have the right deception concept in place. But where we are extremely strong is once there is an attacker in the CyberTrap, we have extremely good analytics engine. We have capabilities there to analyze it, to feedback information and really strong threat intelligence, customer specific threat intelligence information. That's where we're coming from. And what we also have as one of our cornerstones is we want to be as less intrusive as possible at the customer side. Yeah. So the lures, there is no agent to be installed on customer endpoints or things like this. We always said this must be very light. Yeah. And we also not need any high administrative permissions or anything on the customer side. We don't need all these things. Yeah. This is coming from our consulting background because as a good security consultant, and you know it, you will advise your customer not to have external people free access or open access to things. Yeah, it must be controlled if at all, or better no access. Yeah. So this is our approach, and therefore we are very strong in this high interaction deception part. And most probably, as you noted from all the other players out there, we are a European company. We are based in Europe. We have a focus on Europe, and this is where we position ourselves.
Awesome. And I actually really do like that aspect of a focus on threat intelligence. And for me, that is a really important piece to the deception story, right? Because traditionally, our defensive security people have I always refer to it as the SWAT the mosquito mentality. Bad guys discovered on our network. Maybe they've been there for a long time, maybe they haven't, but our first response is kick them off the network right away. And while there are absolutely reasons to do that, and if that's what your goal is, that's a perfectly good thing to do, it does limit some of the benefits, because once you detect that bad guy on your network, you know that they're there and you have their IP address that they're coming from, if nothing else, right? And that's threat intelligence, but that is event-specific threat intelligence. There are companies that pay large amounts of money to subscribe to threat intelligence services, and those services are never going to be providing event-specific threat intel. It's always generic or industry-specific or time-specific, what's going on currently. And this aspect of being able to watch what the bad guys do, and learn about their techniques, learn about their practices, learn about their procedures, learn about their tool usage, that does some amazing things when it comes to deception itself. Because first of all, we could use that information to potentially identify who the bad guy was and prosecute if that's something that is possible to be done, right? So there is an attribution aspect to it. But the aspect of just collecting threat intel means the more I know about what my adversary's behaviors are, the more I can adjust my deception story to match up with those. The more that I can plant my traps and my lures in places where they're likely to go. So we do deception, which gives us threat intel, which allows us to do better deception, which gives us more threat intel, and it just keeps going and going and going. So it's this self-feeding cycle that just keeps improving our defensive capabilities. And I don't really know that there are a lot of other simple, and this kind of gets back to kind of your point of your technology being simple, lightweight, easy to manage, easy to deploy. So you have this simple technology that provides this recurring life cycle, as opposed to SIMs and IDSs where they're very complex. They require a lot of care and feeding. They require a lot of babysitting. And yet, if you do actually get to the point where you get good threat intelligence, you could make those better, but it's not that direct relationship. And I think that is super, super, super powerful when it comes to some of the benefits that we get from a deception perspective. So it's awesome. So I'll throw this out there. I always like to try to keep these things, you know, a half hour, 45 minutes or so, just to, you know, so that the audience doesn't you know, zone out or whatever. So I want to throw this out there to kind of wrap things up just a little bit. What are your final thoughts on anything related to deception, your product, whatever?
Final thoughts. Yeah, I mean, I think you made really the point in your last statement that that's exactly where we find ourselves. And maybe to add another point to that is we have seen deception in the early stages when Gartner started to cover this segment and actually gave a name behind it. We have seen that typically big enterprises who are, of course, also working with Gartner and who became aware of deception started to adapt the things, and some big tenders were coming out, and let's say really large enterprises have started to adapt it, or big governmental institutions.
Absolutely.
Now, what we figured out is, especially when we look into the European countries and Germany, there is a huge potential customer base, which is called in Germany the German Mittelstand. You know, it's a small medium businesses, which are not so small in Germany because they have 2, 3, 4, 5,000 employees and more. They are operating companies, they are operating also worldwide, they have facilities all over. And these companies, of course, were reluctant to adapt such deception technologies by simply saying, I don't have the people to do it, to run it. And this is where we said we want to add a managed service on top of that, either by ourselves or with partners, and if needed also 24/7 service. Plus, we said we want to offer, and that's maybe an announcement I make now today on your show.
Yeah.
We will launch a small SMB version of our software, which will also have, of course, a better price point than the enterprise version, and which will be more affordable, and we believe this will be then adapted also by a broader base of companies, not just the big guys who have everything, their SOC teams who have big budgets and who can do this easily. And this is where we see a huge possibility to make all these companies, and most of them are very technology oriented. They have quite a lot of things to protect, and we make deception available for these companies.
And I think that's super important. A lot of times people equate effectiveness with cost, right? If it's going to be effective, it's going to be expensive. And one of the things that I've noticed kind of across the board when it comes to deception is that every time that I've seen pricing on deception technologies, I've suffered from, I guess, what I would call sticker shock, but not in the direction that most people think, right? When I look at the pricing that I've seen, I've been surprised at how inexpensive deception is for the value that it provides, and the fact that it can be scaled in different levels, as you're talking about having a solution that you can go plug into a gigantic, you know, many tens, hundreds of thousands of person enterprise, but having a solution that can fit into that sort of middle market, and then all the way down to, you know, kind of small, small businesses. It's a technology that scales really well. And the thing that I like about the scaling is that it tends to scale directly in line with size, right? Is it harder to deploy it in an organization with 100,000 people? Sure. But, well, I just mean it's harder because it's just more stuff. But it's not exponentially harder. It's just in line, right? If you've got a small company, you can do a small deployment. If you've got a medium-sized company, you can do a medium. In other words, it's a very linear scale model. at least as I've seen it, which makes it incredibly cost effective as well, because with a lot of technologies, they scale to a big company, but when you're a little tiny company, you can't get them down small enough. And I think deception is awesome there. Now, you had talked about you guys, and I just want to make sure that anybody who's watching this, that we get this question answered, because it, I think, is important. And that is, you guys said you focus on Europe. What if there's a company on this side of the pond over here, I'm in the US, that is like, well, this stuff sounds pretty cool. Do you guys sell it all into the US, or do you guys limit exclusively to Europe?
At the moment, we are limited to Europe. When we don't have capabilities to sell directly into US, we would rather, if there is a company from US approaching us, we would rather try to find out if there is a suitable partner with whom we could serve this company.
Gotcha. Absolutely. So, I'll throw this out there. If anybody's watching this and you guys are like, well, this CyberTrap stuff sounds really cool. If you just send me a message and I can kind of facilitate conversations and, all that kind of fun stuff. So, awesome. This has been fantastic. I've really enjoyed this conversation, and I've particularly enjoyed your perspective on things, because I'll be honest, most of the people that I've talked with have been uber technical people, right? I've talked to chief technology officers and technology implementers, and they have a particular perspective on deception. And I'm really happy that I got your perspective, because it does tend to, even for me, open my eyes a little bit to more of that executive CEO perspective, both in terms of, your view as a CEO, but also the views of CEOs when looking at deception. And I was I really enjoyed kind of hearing that little bit of your journey to getting to this reality of what deception is. And it is so funny, because I think I mentioned it before, but I've never come across anybody that has actually learned about this, that gets it, that hasn't just become very passionate about it. So it's really awesome. So thank you so much. For those of you who are watching, if you enjoyed this content, little thumbs up, like, all that kind of fun stuff. Subscribe if you like this content. And one of the things that I would really love is any comments that you have. If you like the topics that we talk about, if you want to see other topics, if you want somebody to be interviewed, please leave something behind. I would greatly appreciate that, because really it's all about, as an industry, that we share our experiences and that we can start working towards using deception to take back the advantage.